What's up? It's my chilling in my hotel room. Yeah, that's. I don't know that many professors would give you this level of dedication. I could be phoning this in right now, being in Florida and all, but I care too much about you guys in the in the content in the course to do that. Um, so here I am with my. I guess this is my TV video about sitcoms specifically. Um, I put up the sketch, a bunch of SNL stuff went up today for the weekend, but I'll get to TV right now. I mentioned I went through. Was it yesterday? I did. I put a bunch of comments down on the thing there. Um, Responded to some of your stuff and posted some comments of my own. And in those, I realized I was setting the table for today with those comments because a bunch of them are going to come up. Um, and the first one being, we can learn the most from the things we take for granted. That's and what do we take more granted, more for granted of more more for granted than sitcoms. I mean, it's kind of the lowest rung of certainly the lowest rung of television comedy, um, at least according to sort of the public, I guess. When we all know Impractical Jokers is actually the lowest rung of television comedy. But the sitcom is a much maligned medium, right? And it's been sort of ridiculed over the years and sort of, relegated to the uh, the back of the room in terms of important television. Let's put it that way. But I would argue that shows like, and increasingly over the years, shows like Always Sunny have at least brought some credibility to the form. And not just Always Sunny. Always Sunny is up there, but I mean, Arrested Development, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and The Boondocks, and Fresh Off the Boat, and Blackish, and I mean, BoJack Horseman, and there's a litany of TV shows now, and I think this is indicative of this trend in humor that I sort of talk about a lot over the last 20, 25 years. Humor that's about something. South Park, I mentioned that a couple times already. I think there is a movement towards good comedy. I think more artists are taking it upon themselves to, not just be funny, but be thoughtful and insightful. And Always Sunny, as many of you noted, as I noted as well, comes in hot, right out the gate with race, right? Its first episode. Um, and just a little about pilot episodes. If you think about pilot episode is arguably one of the most important episodes of any show in that it's the closest thing to what the artist intends, I think. Because, as you know, shows evolve over time. Um, and that evolution is generally what makes them shitty eventually. The pilot is the creators get together, they write their pilot. If they're lucky enough, they get to shoot it. It's as close to the pure idea of the show as you're going to get in most cases because it takes place before executives, before producers, before writers, before audiences look at it and start to pick it apart and say, well, you can't do this and you can't do that, and they won't like this character, and you got to change this character, and you have to do this, and you can't say that. And the pilot exists outside of that world, and audiences and TV executives and things have ruined, countless shows just by trying to, water it down or cater to a specific group or an advertiser, like all things that aren't artistic. So the pilot is, if you really want to know what a show was supposed to be about or is about, go to the pilot. And in this case, the pilot, like I said, Always Sunny doesn't fuck around. It's like, okay, we're going to be about something. Let's put it that way. If you look at their first season, it was a shortened season because it was a mid-season replacement. But in the first 5 or 6 episodes, they do episodes about race, abortion, cancer, and guns. That's right out the gate. And this brings me to another point about good comedy. I may have mentioned it before, and I apologize if I did, but this idea that good comedy doesn't start with a joke anymore. I don't think. It starts with an idea, like the thing that is most fucked up, right? So in many cases, if you look at good comedy across genres, like that's where it starts. So the fact that Always Sunny came right out of the gate with an episode about race, I think is indicative of what the show intends to do. It tends to look at these issues from a comedic perspective, but, again, comedic doesn't mean without meaning, as many of us have been conditioned to believe. So I think it's important to understand, like, this episode, most of these episodes start with let's talk about abortion, right? Let's talk about race, and let's try to move it around and look at it from different points of view and different perspectives, and not preach and say this is how you should feel about it, which is often a downfall of media, is weighing in and trying to tell us what to think, right? I think good comedy in general, doesn't care what you think. It cares that you think. And there's a big difference between those two things, right? Any good stand-up comedian doesn't give a shit what you think about what they had to say when you leave. But they care that you think about it. They hope you think about what they have to say and their perspective, and that you give value to that. And maybe if they did their job, you thought about it. And whether it changes your opinion or your ideas or your beliefs or your values, whatever it is, that's not important to the comedian. But that you maybe went through and looked inward and asked yourself some questions and thought about, an issue or a topic. I think that's the important thing. It's what makes comedy, especially stand-up, sorry I'm going off on a tangent here, but especially stand-up, just seemingly more honest, because you don't feel like you're being pitched to, right? Politicians want you to vote for them. Religious people want you to, come to their side, right? Advertisers trying to get your money. Like, a comedian just wants you to think about some shit. I think that's an Always Sunny approach as well. So pilot episodes are important. So just the fact that this is the pilot, this was their first statement, right, about what this show is going to be, is important. and that they didn't shy away from it. A couple of you guys mentioned this idea that, oh, you couldn't make this show today. I'm like, well, I understand what you're saying, but they are still making this show today. They're shooting season 15, I think, as we speak. And if you look at, I've mentioned this was from 2005, and yeah, I think tone has changed in our culture. The way we react to comedy has changed. Everybody seems to be seeking offensive material in order to stop it, I guess. But even when I mentioned before, I don't think any comedian's trying to offend anybody, if that makes any sense. There's a difference between being offensive and looking to be offended. But what was I just saying? I can't remember. Oh, they're still making it. And their recent episodes are no less controversial than their initial episodes that I mentioned before. In their last couple seasons, they've done an episode about MAGA. They've done feminism. They've done Me Too and Time's Up. That's a really funny episode. They've done gender, sexuality, global warming. I mean, and everything in between in those 14 seasons that they've done. So, to those of you who say they couldn't make this show now, they are making this show now. And I don't think they've shied away, right, from any of this stuff. In fact, the most current episode about race, where they become black people, is really interesting. The musical episode. If you want to seek that out. Anyway, so yeah, using comedy and the sitcom to address issues and the things we take for granted, right? TV, comedy, sitcom. You're just burying yourself deeper into things that we take for granted, right? First, television, comedy, and then the combination of the two, right? We really don't think about sitcoms that much. But Always Sunny begs you to, right? And there's no laugh track. And, the laugh track, I grew up with a laugh track. Every sitcom had a laugh track. And yes, it's insulting, right? And it's so funny because you guys don't really even know what that is. I suppose you do, because I think they have them on all those Disney. And I'm trying to remember now. Like Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and all that shit. They have laugh tracks. But taking away the laugh track, I think promotes thought, right? And you have to at least be listening and paying attention to get the joke, because you're following a Pavlovian cue to laugh when some guy hits a button, basically, which is what a laugh track is. So anyway, it's been called Seinfeld on steroids. It's Always Sunny. If you look at the breakdowns, right? 3 guys and a girl, and they represent the core characters, and they're just sort of hyper versions of the Seinfeld, the Seinfeld cast. If you kind of look at it, and it's often been compared to that, the dynamics, and they sort of took that idea about that was sort of levied against Seinfeld. Seinfeld sort of claimed it was obviously the show about nothing, but that these characters, you saw the Seinfeld finale, these characters were so self-centered and sort of callous that, they were put in prison, whatever. This is like, oh, you don't you don't even know about self-centered and callous, right? But what they did was they took the show about nothing and they made the show about something, right? Like I said, race, abortion, cancer, guns. They've done like 3 gun control um, episodes, which are really interesting because they take place over the last 15 years basically, and they kind of mark different shifts and um, uh, different shifts in that movement, right, in the gun control debate. Um, so they made it the show about something, right? And they have episodes that are kind of more silly than others or more abstract than others, but for the most part, it's about something. So you sort of have to look at the gang, which is Dee, Charlie, Mac, and Dennis, and then Frank joins in season 2. Um, they sort of have positioned themselves and written themselves as a metaphor for America. And it's the kind of America that we talked about a little bit in Team America, right? Like this, they're sort of they embody what everyone thinks America is, and in many cases, is what America is. Um, but they position themselves as this metaphor for America. And for us, for me and you, right? Like just white America is how they've positioned themselves. So, as a metaphor for that. So, if you look at every episode and the actions of these characters through that lens, this is one of the other things I commented on about normalizing or radicalizing behavior. You should watch this, if you watch it with that in mind, that they are a metaphor for you and me, for Americans, basically, with very broad strokes, then you're supposed to watch and say, man, everyone can acknowledge these guys are assholes. They're obnoxious. They're loud. They're dumb. They're misinformed. They are opinionated, just without merit, ignorant, vain, narcissistic, arrogant. All of those things is kind of how the world sees us. And we're supposed to watch and be like, wait, that's supposed to be me? And with that, we're supposed to be like, I don't want to be like that. It's kind of like Michael Scott from The Office, right? He is at every turn painted as just this outsider. Like everyone in the office knows he's an idiot. So when you're watching, you're supposed to say, I don't want to be like this guy. So you're supposed to say that about them. They're parodies of this general American aesthetic that I think everybody is aware of, right? But a lot of us don't want to admit or look at ourselves to see if we identify with any of those things. Um, so it's what the world thinks of us. So if you start looking at it as the group, as the gang, as a metaphor for us, it starts to give you a little bit more of a nuanced look into these issues of race and abortion, whatever the episode um, might be about. Um, so the way they react to issues, right? It's another layer of meaning. These are the ways that we generally react to issues like this, like race, for example, in this episode. Um, so that seems self-explanatory. It seems pretty obvious, but I don't think it is to everybody. Um, and the way they, I'll write that down. I took some notes here. So a bunch of you commented on this idea. Um, Well, Jonathan mentioned that too, right? Jonathan mentioned how, right, they're sort of, they represent us, and in many cases, accurately. But a couple of you mentioned the way this episode, and this carries on pretty steadily through the rest of the series. The self interest first, right? Everything, and this is an American, I think, an American attribute. Um, Not everybody, obviously, but I think it's a perception that Americans are 100% consumed with themselves, self interest first, right? Um, so every issue that comes up is like, how can I benefit from this first before anything else, right? And there's a lot of picking sides. Like, if nothing else, we're a pick and choose culture, right? We're a pick sides culture. If you're either with us or against us, love it or leave it, like all of that mentality. And every episode of the show is broken down that way, and it's interesting because yeah, obviously you have to pick sides, but they don't pick sides by party lines or by it's random. It's all self-interest, right? So sometimes it'll be Dee and Dennis against, they'll take one side and Frank will take his own position and Mac and Charlie will take their position. And sometimes it's Dee and Charlie. Like it's always mixing, which is an interesting um, suggestion, I think, right? It's this idea like it goes against that idea that our culture is sort of um, two ends of a spectrum, right? They're making decisions. Their decisions change based on the issue, right? In almost every case, that's how it should be, right? You shouldn't just be like Dennis shouldn't just align with Mac because they're best friends, right? There should be some sort of thought that goes into, you know, what they believe, and I think that's an interesting thing that a lot of people ignore about the show is the way they team up. It's not uniform, and it's not by party lines or whatever it is we use to separate each other uh, from others. Um, I'm rambling right now, but the whole idea of every episode, there's like a scene where they're like, okay, we're picking sides on this issue, and it's never the same. Like that's an interesting takeaway, I think, because in our culture wants it to always be the same. You pick a side, and then that means you believe all of these things. There's no gray area. There's no in between, um, and that really doesn't seem to be working very well. Not that it works for them either, but um, I think the way they do it highlights the complexity of issues. The complexity of these issues. It's not just like with the gun control stuff. It's not just like we're pro gun, we're anti gun, and then it's way more nuanced, and way more nuanced than you get from watching the news about it or something like that. Um, I think puts more of an onus onto a viewer, an audience member, to think about how they feel about it, how they actually feel about it, whatever race, whatever the issue might be. Um, as far as the the show itself, I wrote down the stupider the better. I think I mentioned this with Team America. Some of you were like, the gross out humor and blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. It's not for everybody, but I think it's to my exaggeration to the point of realization credo. Um, it's so stupid. Like the off the cuff dismissal of the show can can take place because, oh, they're just so loud and obnoxious. Oh, they're just so dumb. It's just so stupid. Like, why waste your time on it? Well, I think that's saying something about whatever it is the episode might be about, right? It's so stupid, but yeah, that's don't let that fool you, I guess. Right? Comedy is the the airplane spoon. This is maybe this is a credo. I don't know. With the kid, you put the food on the spoon, he won't eat it. You're like, oh, it's an airplane. Open your mouth and whatever. Um, that's that's comedy, right? You don't know it, but it's going to nourish you, right? You need to be tricked into learning sometimes. Um, and in this case, in comedy's case, I think that's what it does. It masks it, right? Think about the way this is a tangent I feel myself launching into. But learning in general, as we know it, has been sort of demonized, right? Learning's for nerds, and no one wants to just. It's been defined a very specific way, right? For instance, you go sit in a classroom, you listen to some old white guy talk about a thing, and you probably fall asleep or you're watching porn on your laptop for an hour, and then when he's done, you leave, and then you don't think about it until the test, and you put it all in brain for the test, and then you spit it out, and you never remember it again. That's learning now. That sounds awful, that whole scenario. But actual learning is fucking insane, right? Like, not knowing a thing, then knowing a thing is it's one of the greatest things you can do as a human being is learn something that you didn't know before or learn about yourself or whatever it is. So my take is comedy sort of learning's the byproduct of comedy. In other words, for hopefully for this class, you're watching Always Sunny and you're watching Fresh Off the Boat and there's movies and stuff, and you're like, oh, I'm not learning anything until you know a couple weeks go by and you start to connect some of these things that we're talking about, and you're like, oh shit, like I was learning, and it was engaging and entertaining and dare I say fun. Um, so I I feel another tangent coming on. I don't want to make this video too long. Um, um, I'll give you this analogy. Um, Learning and exercise, right? They're two things essential to life that most people hate, right? Or we've been conditioned to hate them. Learning is like going to school and books and, you know, whatever, like just stuffy and boring and all that kind of stuff. Exercise has kind of become similar, where it's just like this rote thing. You stand on a thing and you move around, and it's sort of like exercising, like going to the gym is just drudgery. So I hate both of those things. I hate, but in terms of exercise, I can go play basketball. Just play basketball, right? Pick up whatever. I can play for hours and not think about it, right? If I'm exercising on an elliptical or a thing where you move the things, like that's all I'm thinking about is I'm exercising, right? There's just no joy in that. Um, but basketball, I can play for hours because I'm not thinking about the exercise part. The exercise is the byproduct. The exercise is, oh shit, I can't get out of bed the next day, right? Or, you know, I, I feel better physically. Um, but I'm not thinking about that constantly while I'm playing basketball. I'm thinking, I'm going to dunk on this guy. I'm going to break this guy's ankles. That's usually what I'm thinking. Or don't fall. Like, I think about that too. Um, Learning and comedy have the same relationship with me. Learning, as I mentioned before, sucks. Like, think about your experience in classes at Binghamton. You're like, I gotta go to class, and it shouldn't be like that. Comedy is basketball, right? I can watch these movies and think about them all the time, and then it's learning is the byproduct of comedy if you're looking for it. And that is what we're doing here for these 5 weeks. All right, comedy is basketball. That's the credo number 7 something. All right, so Always Sunny looks at issues from multiple perspectives, like Mac, Charlie, Dee, Dennis, and Frank always give, like, with any debate, right, the gun control or whatever, abortion, there's usually two sides. I think they give you those two sides, and then they usually give you a third or fourth angle to look at it, which I think is always interesting and usually funny too. It's a more nuanced examination of issues than you're going to get, certainly from TV news or whatever the fuck that is. So, getting into the specifics of the episode about race and sexuality, it's interesting that they pair those two, right? In 2005, it's interesting to see how the characters, they're so obsessed with Terrell's race that they completely ignore his sexuality, which is, it's as much about race as it is about homophobia or our culture's obsession with race, right? So some of the things that come out of this episode is there's nothing more racist than someone trying not to be racist, right? Mac is trying so hard not to be racist that he's the most racist character in the whole episode, right? Whereas Charlie, for the most part, he's kind of so naive. Charlie only knows how to be Charlie for the most part. So he's not faking anything. He's not trying to not be Charlie. And he has the most success. Like when they go to Temple University, right? And they play dominoes and that whole thing. And the community generally embraces Charlie because he's not affecting. He's not an affected personality. He's himself. And he's just like, yeah, he exudes that, like, we're just people here. Like, who cares what color we are? And, Mac can't get over it. And he's trying to be stereotypical. He's trying to be what the culture has told him he should be like, right? He's trying to play a role. And that generally never works. But Charlie seems to have the most success of everybody because I don't even think it registers, like, in his brain, like, oh, that's a black person, I'm a white person, we're supposed to act a certain way. And basically, here's another credo of mine, number 8, maybe, I don't know how many, I'm trying to keep a running count. Assholes transcend classification, right? This is about assholes, not about black or white or anything else. Every group has assholes. They transcend. There are gay assholes, there's straight assholes, there's black assholes, there's white assholes, there's Asian assholes, there's Latinx assholes, there's male assholes, there's female assholes, there's trans assholes. There's every group has assholes. Assholes transcend classification. And that's the problem. The problem is with assholes. Assholes are the problem. Not race, not gender, not sexuality, not people being different. People being assholes is the problem. And I'm convinced that we're all latent to everything, right? Every single one of us, human beings, is born latently. It's in us somewhere. Racist, sexist, male, female, gay, straight, whatever it is, we have it. What matters is how we deploy those things. And how we deploy those things depends largely on, where our environment, right? Our parents, our religion, our traditions, our friends, where we grew up, like what part of the world we grew up in, like depends on which of those things we deploy and how sort of heavily we deploy them, if we deploy them at all, if that makes any sense. So I think it's an asshole problem. And we're all assholes a little bit somewhere. But some people just have access to that more than others. So, yeah, I think it's kind of like stupidity is the same way, right? Stupidity works the same way, and I think a lot of assholes are stupid. Anyway, Charlie's not putting on an act. Basically, Mac is trying to assimilate, or not assimilate, appropriate, right? Oh, no, it says overcorrecting. Mac's overcorrecting, right? Um, and Charlie's not putting on an act, right? And I mentioned this before. They're so consumed with Terrell's race that they completely overlook his sexuality, which might define him more than his race. I guess we don't know. It's a single episode, but I think that's what this episode is about. To some reason, is like how we stop looking at people beyond their race. In many cases, you see a black person, you assume X, Y, Z about them, and that's it. And then you focus on that. White. Same with any difference. Like that's kind of what we do, and how detrimental that is, right? When we do that, when we focus simply on a small aspect of a person. It's as much about homophobia as it is about race, right? It comments on how consumed with it we are as a culture, right? How we define people outright is largely based on myth and stereotypes that don't generally work. Certainly don't work in positive ways. Like I always talk about that. Like, yeah, we use stereotypes. It's almost impossible not to use stereotypes. But when have you used a stereotype where it like helped, to your advantage, right? 9 times out of 10, the person who says stereotypes exist for a reason needs to stop saying that because it's dumb. Because the reasons they exist, I agree, they do exist for a reason. But the reasons they exist are generally negative and to separate and to demean people and to they're usually used for power's sake, I guess. Race precedes humanity in many cases. That's what this episode kind of talks about, right? Terrell's race precedes everything else about him, his humanity, in the eyes of the gang, which is us, which is America. So I think that's a pretty simple way to connect the dots. I think in this country it does. Like your race precedes your humanity and often cancels it out with the way it's interpreted. So Paige mentioned this. I had wrote it down, and Paige sort of echoed it in her comment, right? They sort of co-opting race and sexuality for personal gain, right? They'll be sure to exploit it, which is, I think, typically American trait. Dennis, they play to his vanity, and once they say he's gorgeous, he's done, right? He'll do anything. He'll pretend he's gay and whatever. Charlie getting the black girlfriend to impress the waitress, right? And that whole, the whole tokenism and black friend thing. And Mac, right? They're appropriating race and sexuality to their benefit. I think that's more sinister than, Miley Cyrus appropriating black culture in her act or songs or whatever it is. Like, this is more detrimental and sinister than that kind of cultural appropriation. Like this is way more dark. But they certainly do it. Okay, so kind of getting to. I don't want this video to be super long, but it's gonna be, because I'm just realizing, like Maria was talking about the scene at the end, of the sexual assault, basically, and how it was sort of fodder for comedy in this case. And she talked about, how troubling that scene was, and that it was, it was 2005, and that we thought that was funny at one time. And Allison brought up some things about, it just made me ask the question, like, how do you guys feel about, the way things have changed in terms of our perception of humor and comedy, right? A lot of you were like, oh, you couldn't do this today, or, they got away with this, and this wouldn't fly. And I don't know, it's definitely worth talking about. I have some specific opinions. To Maria specifically, like, I mentioned this before, I don't think I shouldn't say any, but most comedy isn't out to offend. That's not the intent. And that should, I don't know. It is. I realize how sort of problematic it is that the white, the old white guys telling people how they should react to things. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to give. I'm trying to contribute to the discussion of it. So my response, after thinking about what Maria's questions and what she was asking, was, we as an audience, as a consumer of this content, we're the ones doing the normalizing or the radicalizing. So, like, my point is, the fact that Always Sunny had that scene at the end doesn't normalize the scene or sexual assault. We do. Like, if we watch that and we say, oh, haha, yeah, classic, that normalizes it. But we need to have reactions like yours, which are, wait, that's not right, right? That's a perfect example of, the artist doesn't normalize or radicalize our behavior, our reactions to their art, right? We decide. So if we're watching that, I think it's up to us to be engaged enough of a viewer to give enough credit to a comedy show, right? Not to take it for granted, and to analyze it and talk about it, right? Like, that's sort of the kind of radicalizing of behavior that I think is up to us as individual consumers of media to do. And you are doing it. So that's good. It's up to us as consumers to react to comedy in positive and constructive ways. Because I don't think that scene was put there to, to make light of sexual assault. Yeah, I guess it was a joke. But, and I guess that's it's on us. Let's put it that way. Because as soon as you start saying an artist can't do something, that's a slippery slope to no more art, no more nothing to talk about, right? It's like I'm always wary of going down that road, um, and I don't want to do that. I don't think any of us want to do that, but that is where this sort of cancel culture is headed. It's like you can't say that. Well, you can, but what are we doing with it? You know, I think it's on us as individuals, and your reaction to it is, I think, case in point, right? You're not choosing to let it normalize the behavior or sexual assault or whatever it might be that didn't sit right with you. Um, Hopefully, more people than you see that, react to that, and sort of incorporate it into your own belief system or your lifestyle or whatever it is. And, you know, things get better, I think, as a result of that. All right. This is 46 minutes long. That's way more than I wanted it to be. I didn't even talk about Fresh Off the Boat. I will do that. Okay. Yeah. Jokes about the racists. That was a good. Who said that? James, maybe? I think it was James. Um, yeah. You have to think about who the target of the jokes are. And in most cases with this show, it's the white people. It's the racists in this case, right? Race isn't the butt of the joke the way it was in the 80s and 90s, um, even the early 2000s, right? You have to think about with any comedy, like who's the target of this joke? Who am I supposed to be thinking about and sort of analyzing, right? Jokes about race are different than racist jokes, which is a distinction a lot of people don't like to make or don't understand. Um, so anyway, that's my Always Sunny video. Again, sorry it's so long. I hope you made it this far, even if maybe you skipped over like some chunks in the middle. Yeah, I hope you're have a good weekend. For me, I'm driving home tomorrow, so yeah, fun. I can't even drive. That's why we drove. I told you. And the shades are to protect you from seeing my wonky eye. So maybe before the class is over, my eye will be back to normal, and I'll take the shades off. But for now, I'll remain a mystery, except for that video from last year, that showed you what I look like. Okay, have a good weekend.